Cranial molding. As the exposed, unossified dura mater folds inward, allowing the plates to overlap and reduce the circumference of the cranium, a protective encasement is formed for the many blood vessels that supply blood to the brain. The molding process begins when one parietal bone at the top of the baby's head comes to rest against a lip of a bone in the top of the mother's sacrum, called the sacral promontory. Ideally, this will be the baby's left parietal bone. The first layer of muscles, which are directed from the front of the mother's pelvis to the back, will apply pressure to the right side of the baby's head. This forces the right parietal bone to slide slightly under or over the left parietal bone. The reduced cranial circumference now allows the baby to slide further down, which forces his head to apply pressure against another layer of muscles that stretch from side to side within the mother's pelvis. These hammock-like muscles of the urogenital diaphragm will assist the baby in telescoping the cranial plates at the front and back of his head, under or over the parietal bones. Prolonged contact of the baby's head against the cervix will stimulate a cascade of hormonal responses in both the mother and the baby. The release of one hormone, oxytocin, results in stronger and more rhythmical contractions. When delivery is imminent, the mother's cervix softens and thins out in order to blend in with the wider part of the uterus. The shortening and thinning of the cervix allows the baby's head to rest directly against the os, the opening into the birth canal. Continued pressure against the os initiates the active stage of labor.
Whoa, Mom, do you feel that? We can do this, Mom. We can do it.
The what ifs.
If the mother's body is in a state of balance and the baby is in the optimal position, effacement, thinning of the cervix, and dilation, opening of the cervix, will be symmetrical, and the baby's head will now pass through the pelvic inlet. Now that active labor has begun, the baby's head will rest upon the mother's oblique pelvic floor muscles, which apply pressure to the side of the baby's head, specifically the temporal plates. As the oblique muscles force the temporal plates to fold together, the baby's neck muscles rotate his head toward his left shoulder and activate the primitive asymmetric tonic neck reflex.
There's our first
This will
one.
result in an elevation of the left shoulder, which then reduces the diameter of the upper torso. Ideally, the baby will turn his face toward the curved portion of the mother's sacrum, and the back of his head will line up under her pubic bone. The baby can now slide even further into the birth canal. Once he moves past two bony points inside the mother's pelvis, called the ischial spines,
This is from the top
he will
looking
continue
down.
to turn another 45 degrees until the widest diameter of his head lines up with the widest part of the pelvic outlet, the vaginal opening. As the baby rotates through the birth canal, the contractile forces of the vaginal wall stimulate one side of his spine, which activates the primitive Gallant reflex. This results in hip flexion and a decrease in the diameter of the lower portion of the baby's torso, allowing the baby's pelvis to slip through the fully dilated cervix. Crowning occurs when the top of the baby's head can be seen at the vaginal opening. As he slides through the opening, pressure from the anal gutter will force his head backward into extension. This will accomplish two things. One, the back of his head can slip under the pubic bone, and two, the primitive Perez reflex will be activated by strong contractile stimulations to the baby's entire spine. Extension of the baby's head will result in extension of the baby's pelvis and legs. That, along with the influence of the Perez reflex, will cause the baby to eliminate any remaining amniotic fluid from the lower urogenital tract. The result is a tight, compact pelvis passing through the birth canal. Extension of the legs and pressure of the uterine wall against the top of the feet will fire another primitive reflex that forces the baby to simulate walking, thus pushing against the top of the uterus. Once his head is out of the canal, the baby must roll his shoulders around so they too can line up with the widest diameter of the vaginal opening. To accomplish this, the mother's oblique pelvic floor muscles apply pressure to the shoulders, turning them until they can slip past the ischial spines. This results in the desired head rotation. As the baby's shoulders roll to line up with the vaginal opening, his neck muscles will slowly turn his head back toward his chest. Once the baby's shoulders are lined up properly, he will proceed to roll his body out of the birth canal. After delivery, the baby will intuitively cry out in vibrant bursts of sound to 1. Restore normal fluid dynamics by forcing cerebral spinal fluid and blood back into the cranium, 2. Force air into the lungs to initiate breathing, and 3. To initiate a proper rhythm within the craniosacral
system. Wow. So what a beautiful mystery. And part of that, if we can understand, begin to see a piece of how the bones are formed within her who is with child. So as we finish all this up and tying together the other scriptural verses that we looked at the beginning, I would like to close by taking a more detailed look at Psalm 139. We have looked at these reflexes in the science portion in detail, and now one of these most famous passages about birth, I would like to take a look at this one and see in detail what some of these words mean and how accurately it reflects this process that we have just witnessed here. First, I'll go through and just read the passage straight through, and then we'll look at it in some more detail. Psalm 139, verses 13 to 16. For you formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret, and skillfully wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Your eyes saw my substance being yet unformed, and in your book they were all written, the days fashioned for me, when as yet there were none of them. So first, a comment about Hebrew poetry. It's often written in parallel structure, which can help us to get a repetition of an idea either for clarity, or it will be a contrasting idea, or the second phrase will be an explanatory phrase that will build on and complete the idea presented in the first one. We'll be seeing some of each of these presented in this part of the psalm. The very first phrase, for you formed my inward parts, or the King James